Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Began. I chair the Wenham Finance and Advisory Committee, and I'll call the meeting to order as we've got our full committee here tonight. All five of us are happy to be joined by you for our warrant hearing this evening. Just to kind of cut to the chase real quickly, we're pleased to present that despite the budget challenges facing Wenham last year and this year again, through the vicissitudes of working through this process, the members are able to present to you a budget within the levy limit for the town of Wenham, and we're all set. So it's my attempt at an April Fool's joke. Now that that's out of the way. Sorry, half-hearted.
We missed it, sir.
Half-hearted. But seriously, so what we're here to do tonight is to kind of have an advanced look at all of the warrant articles before town meeting this Saturday, right in the auditorium next door, starting at 1 o'clock, right? Officially, and lunch beforehand and all that good stuff that you all, I'm sure, know about and is well printed. And I believe there are books in the back in case anyone didn't get the part 2 of the warrant book, which has the articles that we'll be going over. So the format for this evening is, I'll just kind of give my thoughts on it as in line with the way we presented this last year. It's rather informal with respect to the meeting and presentation format. Audience participation from residents is obviously encouraged. That's why you're here, so you can learn and ask questions and interrupt any time. Just throw a hand up. It's not a moderated discussion otherwise. We do have the PowerPoint slides, which have been prepared, which we'll use to go through. I'll be doing the bulk of the speaking along with showing you the information on the screen that will coincide with. Do they have these as well?
Yeah, there are copies in the back of these.
Okay, so you've got copies of the slides as well, should you wish to view fine print or take notes or what have you. And we can move around slides. If I move too quickly, let me know, say to jump back, and I'll try to gauge if I'm moving too slowly by people nodding off. The good news is, so as it relates to town meeting last year, obviously was a difficult one. We had our first override in some time. We had a significant number of articles, large number of financial articles, large number of policy laden articles that didn't have money behind them. But we have far fewer this year, and we've also taken a great number of steps through meeting a number of town department heads, myself, chair of the board of selectmen, town clerk, town moderator, town administrator, finance director, all to basically come up with ways of having this year's town meeting run even more smoothly. And so we revisited just earlier today at town hall that list again of 20 some odd items and putting many of them to work. So I won't belabor that, but I think we'll find that this year we're on point and ready to move. So without further ado, I'll get to the slides before us. And is that visible well, or should we can pivot it more so, especially for John, your half of the, at the risk of pulling out cables and the like. I mean, well, I'm just, if others behind you might not see it as well either.
It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, on a delay. Jackie, you were right. Okay. Yeah, I think it's not registering the clicks as.
We just need to pivot the actual laptop.
Oh, is it actually infrared, not RFID?
You gotta try that. That should work.
Are you clicking the arrows versus the circular button?
I'm clicking the arrows to the right.
Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
Okay.
Get the signal.
All right, so a quick budget summary for fiscal year 2020. So we have Articles 1, 3, and 4 that comprise the bulk of the budget this year for Wenham. And this follows a somewhat similar format as we did last year with regard to a levy limit budget article and then follow-on override articles. So the first Article 1 is the FY20 budget appropriation in the amount of $19,748,600. That's an increase of $745,246 from the current fiscal year. Article 2, which we'll come back to, is skipped here. That's free cash, but we'll talk more about that. Article 3 is the regional school district operating override 1 of 2, so hence it's labeled number 1 there, which adds to the levy limit $499,145 as an override. That's, of course, above and beyond the Article 1 appropriation. Incrementally, Article 4 will add $89,875 if approved as the school operating override number 2, or second of the 2. And we'll get into, of course, details behind those. Of the $1.3 million roughly in total proposed budget increases outlined in 1, 3, and 4 combined, 48% or just over 48% are related to town municipal expenditures, with just shy of 52% related to the regional and vocational school assessments to Wenham. So it's not quite a 50-50 split, close, about 48-52. Okay, assuming it doesn't jump ahead further, then we're good. Okay, on to revenue. Having looked at the very high level expenditures, projected local receipts have increased meaningfully this year by $256,388. The Hamilton assessment increased $103,000. That is in part due to the assessment for the library, the new joint inspectional services program with the town of Hamilton, joint rec program. Any other key drivers I'm missing here? That's good. And on local receipts, these are largely driven by things like auto excise taxes. So we've got a strong economy, we've got a lot of car purchases, we're bringing the fleet up to newer, and we're paying taxes every year after in doing so as residents. On the revenue side, an increase of roughly $74,000 due to a reduction in state 911 charges for regional dispatch. What this means is for our current emergency dispatch center, we pay roughly $75,000 per year. So we get the state aid, and then it's an offset to that revenue to pay for it for the center in Danvers. Now, State 911 is going to be taking over this program, and in the process of doing so, they will cover the costs associated with Wenham's participation in that emergency dispatch center. So financially, certainly a benefit. There are some other considerations, I think, as well, that the town is considering with this move to being controlled by State 911. But be that what it may, the dollar impact is such that the revenue offset goes away, and so it's really counted as additional revenue. Overlay reserve for abatements, we upped that from $135,000 to $195,000 this year, given that we've had an increase in assessments in some cases due to the measure and list process, which we can talk about, as well as just the tax rate increase and the expectation that we might have more in the way of abatements. I mentioned Article 2 was free cash, $700,000. Last year was $750,000 that we used to balance our budget, so that's down $50,000 from the previous year. We'll see, I think, in some later slides that free cash balances are on the decline year to year as we face budgeting pressures and as we tighten up our budget. This leaves $277,000. About $278,000 in free cash or in unappropriated free cash, which serves as the reserves, as is policy to have at least $250,000. A lot of numbers on that one. Any questions? I might pause from time to time just in case someone's contemplating a question. And to take a sip of water. The next slide looks at the expense drivers, some of the major drivers in the, to the increases in expenditures. Okay, so $4,075,521 are the town expenditures, which are up $360,000. These are largely driven by $122,000 increase in health insurance, $66,000 for the regional assessment, regional retirement assessment. MS4 permitting, $50,000, which last year we paid for with free cash. So this year we're absorbing it into the budget without that free cash to pay for it. It's kind of a common theme as we reduce our dependency on free cash. We have to pay for these expenditures in the budget. as we're doing here with MS4 permitting. MS4 basically refers to stormwater permitting requirements imposed upon the town and all other municipalities, basically, related to controlling for environmental impact and not having a negative impact on all our storm drains and watershed impact and the like. There's a whole lot involved, and that is the cost of some of the permitting. Yes, John?
These are federally required regulations?
Actually, I think I might have said DEP. Is it DEP or is it Mass?
No, they're
federal,
federal
right?
stormwater requirements that went into effect at the July 1 of this year. So we had previously funded for them in a prior year
2 years ago,
authorization
right.
that we were then able to apply to this year, $45,000. But going forward, we have it funded at $50,000 for FY20. And it is a federal requirement.
Clean Water Act.
Thank you. Other expenses are up 122,000 to bring us to the increase of 360, almost 4.1 all in. Salaries are up 170,000 thereabouts, 4.4 million. These increases include a cost of living adjustment for employees, for all employees, and for non-union employees, an up to 2% merit-based increase, as well as other contractual increases for salaries and wages. Capital increases, 136,500 to 309,147. We had some prior year capital obligations, which were also paid for in free cash, which we're now absorbing to the budget. These generally are like equipment lease, multi-year lease to own arrangements, hence the contractual obligation and need to keep paying it as we must. And 41,000 new capital, in particular firefighter safety equipment, scuba tanks, things of that nature for the protection of our public safety officials and firefighters. That's expense drivers. Okay. Quite simply, a pie chart showing the allocation of expenditures for the FY20 levy limit budget. This would be the Article 1 expenditures. And it's probably a little tough to see the text, the font size on the screen, and of course your printouts are in black and white. But essentially it shows a breakdown across the kind of major categories of expenditures. Education is the roughly half. General government and public safety and human services is kind of that top piece. Culture and rec is the top one at 1.4 million.
57.
Public works on the left at 1.5. Public safety would be the red slice. So you get the gist, and there's another category in there as well. Just good to see the breakdown of the tax dollars, how they're spent across various, not so much departments, but categories of expenditure. And with both overrides, it's just a minor change, basically. You'll see if I double back, we have roughly 50%, and then going to slight increase in the education component, essentially. And the remainder is just rescaled. Okay, turning to the FY20 budget school assessment expense summary. Yes?
In terms of percentage, what is the percentage increase of the overrides over the budget no override?
Sure. Yep. So just so I understand the question exactly, the percentage increase,
Will, of course, be reflected in the assessment increase.
right, absolutely. So I think I've got those numbers exactly in slides that will be coming up when we look more closely at the impact of the override. And if not, I will be sure to give them to you as well. Certainly we have the incremental increases in dollar terms, and it might just be a quick, if you were to look at, for example, inside of your yellow book here, part 2, if you go in just a few pages, to the sideways oriented line items here, what you would see on the second page that's not complete, excuse me, on the first page it is complete, you would see the override items of $499,145, and for override number 1, and then override number 2, you'd see that same amount, an additional $116,119, which we'll talk a little bit more about too when we get to, because that number is being adjusted. Those are the incremental amounts, and you would basically look at Article 1 total expenditures, which is in bold right above it. I'm happy to give you the percentages. I'm just pointing out where I'll get them from, so you can also plug the numbers should you wish to, and have the benefit of seeing them firsthand. Okay. So the school assessment summary, it's up here. Okay. Wenham school assessment, including excluded debt service, is $10,721,411. That wording I know is a little bit confusing, including excluded debt service. It just really relates to the nature of debt exclusions. When debt is offered and authorized by residents for either the town's expenditures, raising debt, or for the school's purposes, those are excluded from the levy limit increase rules for Prop 2.5, and so it's referred to as excluded debt. The reason we say that we're specifically including the excluded debt here is that there is a change in the amount of excluded debt. Specifically, it's rolling off of the school's books, and that net impact, that savings to the town of Wenham, is reflected in this number that we see here. And there's a little bit of kind of color on it down below in these sub-bullets. So the operating expense for the school at large from fiscal year 19 to 20 increases 6% net of offsets, which are for school choice and for circuit breaker, special education expense offsets. The Hamilton Regional School District assessment increased 3.9%. Now you might be wondering why we care about their increase. It's really just there by, for a measure of comparison, whereas Wenham's increase is 6.6% year over year. So a considerably larger increase, obviously, to the Wenham assessment. And that's driven by the enrollment trends. That is the split of students comprising the total enrollment at the regional school district, and Wenham's portion having increased over time relative to Hamilton's having decreased. So just kind of to put some numbers to the comments I made about the inclusion of excluded debt, the assessment of $10,721,411, that's what we owe the schools to fully fund their budget for Wenham's portion of it, is net of roughly $201,000 in debt service savings. This was for the middle school, authorized by both towns, both member communities, a while ago. That debt service has been paid, that debt has been paid off, and so the debt service expense rolls off the school budget. And in turn, that is the Wenham's share of those savings that would otherwise be paid. So if you think about Hamilton's, that would be about twice that amount, roughly $400,000 for a total amount of $600,000 net savings on the school's budget. Any questions on that? Okay. Yes?
I have a question.
Yep.
How do you see that enrollment shift going forward next year after? For the public's consumption,
Yeah.
that enrollment shift has cost us quite heavily over the last 3 or 4 years. What's the projected?
Sure, very, very much so. So, John, the rate of change has slowed. If we think about the FY20 split, which for the town of Wenham is 35.95% exactly of the total school expenditures that we're on the hook for, that number has increased from closer to 30% in just the past 5 years or so. All we know is if we were to hold constant the enrollment today at the schools for Hamilton and Wenham, 620 I think for Wenham and 1,100 or so for Hamilton, whatever those exact numbers are, if you hold it constant, then we roll off the prior 2 fiscal years as we add more for the three-year rolling window. So I think most of the enrollment studies and the demographic trend analysis that's done by McKibben or McKibben, is on the community at large, generally speaking, right? Or are they breaking it? No, they're breaking it for Wenham. That's right. Last year they did.
McKibben did do, normally we're getting our projections from NASDAQ,
Right.
which aren't necessarily that accurate year to year. The school commissioned a separate study by McKibben that was presented about a year ago now, just a little over a year ago.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, the trend is for that line to flatten, for there to be a plateau in the enrollment shift over the next 5 years. And we've seen on the order of $300,000 or so in annual enrollment cost shift impact in the past 4 years. This year's down each year.
Each year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the next slide touches on this point exactly.
Yeah.
So for this year, for our difference between FY19 to FY20, our assessment is up $177,000 just due to the enrollment shift, which is about half, actually, of what it's been the past several years. So it's been over $1.2 million in enrollment shift costs over the past 5 years. But that is very much trending, down to a more stable number. And as Alex referenced, since our assessment is calculated based on the 3-year rolling average of student enrollment, most of the reason why that impact is still so high this year is because of prior years. And so going forward, as those continue hopefully to drop off, we'll see a flattening of that.
Right. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, we're rolling off the steeper parts of the curves on both sides. But as Peter indicated, it has, on a cumulative basis, made a significant impact on Wenham's ability to fund its budget under levy limit. So going back to 2013, Wenham's enrollment has increased by 9.3%. Hamilton's has decreased by 10.9%. Hamilton has about twice the number of students, roughly, than does Wenham, and so the total enrollment has seen a declining trend in recent years. But certainly with Wenham's increase, that is the reason for the increase in the assessment. Year-over-year operating expenses for the regional school district, independent of those, Wenham's assessment has increased by $177,000 just this year alone. That's if you're to hold the budget constant from last year, from FY19, as Peter mentioned. In the past 5 years is, $1.25 million roughly on Wenham taxes. The operating budget has increased by 21.8% for the schools, or $5 million over the past 5 years. And Wenham's assessment has increased by $3 million over this time. The other $2 million is taken up by Hamilton, even though, of course, as I mentioned, Hamilton has a lot more students than we do. So it just goes to show kind of various ways of thinking about the enrollment shift playing out. And of course, that is the means by which we calculate the assessments as spelled out in the regional agreement. And so certainly that's what we'll pay for our students to attend relative to Hamilton's. Any questions on this? Yes.
I must be missing something. So although Wenham's enrollment has increased and Hamilton's has decreased, what is the overall enrollment? Has that increased or not?
Overall enrollment has decreased slightly over the past few years. Wenham's has increased by 9%, but that's on, currently 600 and I think it's 611 or 604. Yeah. Right in that range, very low sixes, very close to 600. So if we're up, 9.3%, that's somewhere in the mid fives. And if Hamilton's has decreased by 11% and they're at, 1,100, then their decrease in students obviously more than offsets our increase.
So over that time, the number of students have decreased,
Mm-hmm.
the operating budget has increased by 22% over the same period of time.
On a cumulative basis, that's correct. Over the past 5 years, 13 to 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That may not align perfectly. Because we're, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I don't, yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't think those times align perfectly. I think the 2013 goes back a little bit further than the 5 years on the 2018. No?
No.
Are they? Oh, for
So actually,
FY19.
For FY, for the FY19, or I'm sorry, for the FY15 school assessment, they're using 2013 enrollment figures. So that's why.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of their key budget drivers, I think they would speak to as being out-of-district placements, which, certainly have the ability to be much higher, even with a lower base of students, associated transportation, contractual salary increases and the like. But yes, it's certainly, I mean, we felt the brunt of it, not only because of the apportionment formula, because of the percentage increase on the general operating budget itself, as you've pointed out.
The out-of-district placements this year is over $890,000,
Yeah.
over and above last year. That's a significant driver for the schools to kind of meet.
Yes. Right. It really is, yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it is both. So there's the total gross operating expenses that the schools carry because they're obviously educating both towns and not thinking about the split per se necessarily until it comes time to do the assessment. So you could hold their budget constant from year to year, not increase it at all, and we could pay more year to year because of proportionally we're sending more students to the schools than is Hamilton relative to the last three-year trend. But certainly, the expenses have been, over the last 3 fiscal years, the general operating expenses after offsets have been about 5.1% and are 5.97% this year, 6% effectively. So when half of your budget is increasing by 6%, and then compounding with the fact that the enrollment trend is causing us to pay a higher percentage, by a couple percent as a split, from 34 to 36%, somewhere in that range, then it's a compounded effect. Correct. Yes, agreed. Yeah.
And also, there's not always a proportional reduction in school expenses until you get a certain critical mass of reductions, because if you have 2, students down or 10 students down per year, you can't necessarily reduce all the teachers, and it's not gonna be one whole class you can cut out. And they also, salaries are 60% of their budget, and we have a highly educated teaching staff and administration, and also healthcare costs and retirement costs. A lot of these, if we had a pie chart of the school budget, you'd see a lot of these being big pieces of the pie. So.
Thank you, Karen.
We did ask the school committee and administration to be here to answer questions. Is anyone here?
I don't believe so.
No. Yeah, so we're doing the best we can, but we can certainly ask them to follow up if they want to offer any clarification to our answers. Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd like to make a comment that you just confirmed there's no other representing the schools, yet they are over 50% of our cost.
Correct.
I find that a bit upsetting to know that there's no representation here to even answer fundamental questions. So,
Yep, it's always helpful to have them represent their budget. Of course, they'll do so at town meeting. presumably give a presentation as is typically done by the superintendent. And, yeah, we'll do what we can in the meantime. Yeah, by all means. Okay. All right, so I've got one more on the assessment, which I know we've covered in some detail. This relates to the articles that we'll be voting on at town meeting and at the ballots. Article 1, Article 3, and Article 4, levy limit and 2 overrides, as was mentioned previously. So Article 1 includes funding for $79,000 of Wenham's FY20 Regional School District Assessment increase. This increase is net of the debt service decrease of $201,000 that I mentioned earlier. So the overall assessment increase without the debt service reduction, you simply add those two together, is $280,000. Basically what that means is that we're effectively supporting in our levy limit budget an increase of our net assessment year over year of $280,000, factoring in that savings and applying it to the school's budget versus applying it to some other town expenditures. The total amount is essentially $10 million. Article 3 includes an additional $499,000 for Wenham's regional school district assessment that funds the level of the school district's budget that they identify as being level services. So they've put a number on their level services at large, and we use the apportionment formula to find out how much that is. The difference being that their level services amount assessed to the town of Wenham, 36% of the split, reducing, or rather offset by our Article 1 levy limit budget. So that difference is $499,000, which incrementally is added to Article 1. Worth noting that 1, 3, and 4 are all needed to fully fund the Wenham assessment for the regional school district. Without all three of these passing, these articles, the school district, the operating budget would have failed for the town of Wenham, or for the district, I should say. Article 4 adds $89,000 incrementally in expenditures, and that covers the balance of the FY20 Wenham assessment related to funding for other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, for school employees. So OPEB is essentially healthcare for past, current, and future retirees of the regional district. And we'll look at that in some more detail as well. So that's kind of the high level for the override articles. I'm sure we'll get into more detail here.
Alex, is the cap on type?
No, it isn't, Jackie. But I don't think it has been at all, and I managed to get.
I'll go change it. I open that door.
Capital expenditures might include a new
Got it. She's close.
remote at some point.
Someone pulled an
We
April
can,
Fool's joke
Alex,
on
why
you.
don't we try from our,
You want to? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
Give it a
Peter.
shot.
I apologize for
April
not-
Fools.
not being able to work that effectively in any way. Okay, so the tax rate impact of Article 1, as with the FY19 budget and the override last year, we sought to basically provide residents with as much clarity and detail and transparency as it relates to the dollar impact, which can get a little bit confusing because we're raising the levy limit through the additional expenditures, and then there's a corresponding shift in tax rates and tax bills. So here we see that the levy limit for Article 1 is not raised because there's no override for Article 1. It allows us to tax our residents to the tune of $16,260,660. Our total valuation for fiscal year 19 is set at $800,932,916. That's up meaningfully from the FY18 valuation. You divide the first number by the second number, you multiply it by 1,000, and you get $18.46 for our projected tax rate. Where today we're at $18.02. So this would represent an increase if Article 1, through approving Article 1, an effective increase of 44 cents on the tax rate, or 2.5% tax rate increase in percentage terms. And then we basically play out what the median tax bill would look like in the dollar increase, since I got mine today. I don't know if anyone else got theirs as
Yeah.
well. It has Patty's name on it. I have it with me. I didn't bring my checkbook.
Friendly treasure collector.
And so the estimated tax bill increase of $253 stemming from Article 1 expenditures is based, of course, on a median home value, which for this FY19 is $574,100. Yes?
In the future, can we put it more unit terms? Like, can we put next to what 575,100 is, what that tax rate would be? So people wouldn't just see the increase, but actually what they pay. You see what I'm saying? The clarity there is just.
Sure.
This is what you're committing to, and this is the increase.
Your full tax bill, in other words, for the year?
Just to show.
Yeah.
You might know it in your head, but.
Yep.
You know, the rest of us have to calculate, what's my number?
Yep, that's a good idea.
Be in that full roll-up, Alex?
It is in the full
Chart,
roll-up,
in the
isn't it?
chart?
Yeah, is it there? Or are you
Oh,
saying
we
add
can
it in
add
there?
it to the chart.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good idea. That number will hit home. It's, whether it's 10 or 11,000, kind of that number that people have in the back of their head for that kind of median range. Thank you for that. We can do that. Any other questions? This format will kind of continue, so for Article 3, which is kind of the override number 1, if you will. So this adds the $499,145, as I mentioned, to the levy limit, hence it's an override. The valuation stays the same, the value of all the properties in town, $880,932,000. And so what this does is add an additional 56 cents to the tax rate increase of 44 cents for Article 1. For a total increase of 5.5% tax rate increase over the FY19 rate of $18.02. So it brings it to, the percentage actually isn't there, sorry, that's a little tricky to follow. 1802, 44, 1846, plus 56, 1902, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
we've got it on the last slide.
In the last slide, you're right. So, so 1902. So up a buck effectively on the tax rate. Estimated tax bill increase incrementally, $321, and that would be in addition to the 253 on Article 1. So perhaps in, yes, Jack? Thanks, Jack. So yeah, that has the historical assessed values, the median. Right. So what we could show then on our slides is that annual tax bill with the incremental on top of it. Yep. Thank you. Okay, and then the second override adds another $89,875 to the levy limit to fully fund the regional assessment to town of Wenham. So again, hold the valuation constant because we're just looking at the tax rate impact here. Divide the total sum over the levy limit now, which includes the $500,000 from override number 1, Article 3, and you get an additional 11 cents. Actually, in this case, it's just incremental. So you get another 11 cents on the tax rate, which brings us to, we're at 1902, 1913. Thank you very much. 1913 per thousand on the tax rate. For a tax rate increase of 6.2% over FY19. And an additional $63 on a median home value at $574. We also have another chart, which I think might be the next slide. Yeah, so we can maybe, let's pause here for a moment. So before I cover that last bit of disclosure on the bottom part of the slide, are there any questions? Okay. So Article 4, I don't think that's 73,000. That should be a third of that, right? 36% of 73, because our article only
Oh, yeah.
26. Is
Yeah,
that right?
sorry, it's
Okay.
the actual, the school district's budget has
No
been
worries.
reduced by.
That's right, okay. All right, so Article 4, as we may discuss this evening, as well as I'm sure it'll be discussed and presented at town meeting, is changed somewhat as the school committee recertified their district budget, their FY20 budget, with a lower dollar amount than was originally adopted and voted in January. The reduction in that dollar amount, the reduction in the budget was $73,000. And originally that was to, that expenditure was for a school resource officer, or SRO, which at the time was also likely going to be paid for by the town of Hamilton. As it unfolded very recently, and after our books unfortunately went to print, an arrangement was worked out between the regional district and the town of Hamilton, such that that expenditure is on the town of Hamilton's budget, and therefore had to be removed from the school district's budget. Again, $73,000. Now, our assessment goes down 36%, 35.95% of that $73,000. So our Article 4 in front of you, unfortunately, includes a little bit more than it ultimately will be, than will be spent by the town, even if it were to pass.
It's $26,244 less.
Thanks, Jim. Judy? It's not correct in this wording right here, and we'll update that.
A third of that.
It should be roughly a third of that, should be,
26,000, just over $26,000. So the
26,244.
the school district budget for FY20 was reduced by $73,000 in total. So our assessment will be reduced by $26,000 for the SRO funding.
right. Gary?
What happens to the actual ballot on the override question for?
Yeah, excellent question.
Incorrect numbers on the
Yep.
ballot?
Yep, so we were meeting earlier today on that very topic. So what's on the ballot is unchangeable. With that said, it doesn't have the dollar amount. It does have the specific wording, which includes not only OPEB, but school resource officer. That said, it wasn't binding that, for example, even if it didn't pass, the school committee wouldn't be required to remove that from their budget, right? It was ideally for, the rationale for doing it this way is so that residents understand what these incremental expenditures are going towards. Now, we may have to appropriate or
I'm going to jump in.
raise, yes, I do.
Okay.
Might have to raise that money and not spend it, I think
Yeah.
is how it works.
So the short answer is that there will be an authorization if the article is approved by town meeting and that ballot question is approved at the ballot. There will be an authorization, but not an appropriation for that full amount. So the town will technically have $26,000 of levy capacity. Our levy ceiling will then be increased more than we actually have an appropriation for. But we will then just pay our assessment for the regional school district for the next fiscal year at the amount that has been approved by the school committee.
Right. Yep, little nuance there. And again, it's unfortunate, clearly we do not want to be sending out warrant article books with, anything but what is most current and up to date, but this unfolded between the schools in Hamilton much more recently, despite our urging to fix it much sooner. Yes?
But it's not that we just printed it on the deadline that we decided on, that's a state deadline to have put the ballot.
Oh,
as a warrant.
absolutely.
And they're changing it.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, specifically for the ballot questions. We're working on a state deadline there.
Right. Yep. It was also in both budgets on January 2nd when presented here in this room. So it wasn't late breaking, it was just resolved later than it should have been. Judy?
I think Peter just said that, but I couldn't hear everything, so confirm, it takes a majority vote at
majority vote for both.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And absent that all happening, then the, regional district budget has failed, and then they begin to go through their process.
If any of those three, 1, 3, and 4 fail, and any town meeting in or out, that budget fails, and then what happens?
And the school committee revisits that budget. They can choose to set a new budget or keep it at that same number, and special town meetings are called in both towns. And presumably, we would then have to have another election.
Can you guys speak up because the children really loud for us?
Okay.
Sorry, that's what I'm trying to turn up.
Sure.
Alex, do you have volume on your mic? Because when Jim is in his mic, we
Yeah.
get a speaker. So I don't know if you have that, but.
How-
Is that amplified? Is that better? Okay.
So just get closer to them.
Very close. Okay.
Hot
Like an
mic.
ice cream cone. I got it.
So Virginia, just wanted you to repeat what you had said about the process and what happens if the school district budget fails and if any of these fail, and what happens?
So the school committee then takes up their budget again for FY20. They can vote to keep it the same or reduce it. And then the budget would be certified and sent to both communities again. And special town meetings would be called in both towns. And in Wenham's case, we would have to call a special election to have an additional ballot question.
Okay. Move to the next slide. So the following slide is a breakdown of Articles 1, 3, and 4 in a similar format. So beginning with the current tax rate of
You got the
1802. Article 1 levy limit increase adds 44 cents to the tax rate. 56 cents is added for the override, number 1, Article 3. Second override, Article 4, adds 11 cents for a total increase of $1.11 estimated on the tax rate at $19.13 per thousand, which is a 6.2% increase, as the wording at the bottom there states, with an estimated tax bill increase of $637 on a median home valued, again, at $574,000. Yes, John?
On the article that addresses the OPEB issue,
Right.
that's about $250,000, if I recall. The projected for the following year, if we commit to this, there's a projected set of numbers that follow this.
Correct.
Can you explain that to the public?
Sure. I forget offhand if I've been going through so many slide decks.
How seriously financially?
Yep. Sure, John, absolutely, I will, regardless of whether or not I have the slides. I'm just ahead. What I'm doing is making sure that I don't state something and then come across slides that would either help me state it or,
There isn't anything else to.
There- okay.
further, no.
all right, so good. So you get my free-form version.
Test your memory.
So the regional school district worked with internally with outside advisors, Odyssey Advisors, who of course does the town of Wenham's actuarial analysis as well for the GASB OPEB analysis and audit requirements. Their liability is $35 million for the unfunded OPEB liability. The town of Wenham's, just by comparison, is roughly $5 million, so it's 7 times ours. The school hasn't, the schools have not funded OPEB at all in the past, and to do so, they need to do 2 things. They need to establish a trust fund, which their school committee adopted, which they opted to do with this budget, and to set a funding schedule. And the funding schedule, John, is, as you allude to, begins with $250,000 in funding in FY20, and then FY21 through 24 increases it by an additional $250,000 each year until it reaches 1.25 million, and at which point it levels off and funds at 1.25 million for the following 13 years or somewhere in that range, to roughly 23 34, I think.
25, I thought.
35, is that right? 25? 25 years?
Well, no, 35.
The goal of their schedule that they had adopted was to fully fund their pension obligations in 30 years or so. And somewhere along the way,
See this same increase each year for the next 5 years?
correct, and then at that rate continually.
The current taxpayers, you're gonna take an old debt and expect
Right,
taxpayers to pick up that tab.
right. Well, we're on the hook regardless, so of that $35 million, right,
As all municipalities.
as all member communities in a similar situation.
I
Yeah.
understand this is nationwide,
Correct.
but we have to deal with locally, and we have to pay the tax bill.
That's right. That's right. And this would constrain us significantly on our ability to meet our towns and frankly the schools' funding needs year to year. FY '20, I mean, if these overrides were to pass, we would still be in a very, very similar situation next year at this time, the following year, unless there were some meaningfully positive upside shock, which we're not aware of at all, even with some improvements to be it apportionment formula or new growth coming online through developments in town, it wouldn't help us significantly. To put a couple numbers on it, the towns, Gary, 1 second, the town's levy limit increases by roughly $500,000 each year, and we would be subject to about a third, about $90,000 of that $250,000 increase each year. So a good portion, 15, 20% of our levy limit increase each year would go towards that and that alone. And that's, of course, not only not town expenditures that might be needed, capital, et cetera, but also school expenditures, where I think the school would find themselves highly constrained in seeking to do more with educational programs, given that that is going to then be part of their budget with an increase, on the order perhaps of 5% per year. Once you're in a few short years at $1.25 million, that 5% increase each year is also compounding meaningfully. And I think it's aspirational. It's fiscally addressing OPEB is the right thing to do. Perhaps not at this level. It is definitely a financially responsible thing to do, but it's in no way affordable by the town of Wenham. In the current situation, it's untenable.
So ultimately, and I have to agree with you, we're gonna become school rich and town poor. Because you can see the lopside in this, that cost is going to have to our town budget, and what services are we going to ultimately have to give up to address that type of money?
Sure, or put another way, the increases in the operating expenses, the operating budget of the schools year over year, coupled with the enrollment shift, have certainly limited our ability to do what we feel we need to do on the town side, while funding the school assessment for the grade education and staying within our levy limit. Didn't happen last year, it's not happening this year, of course, and the projection does not look any different for the upcoming years.
Got it. They've ignored it for years, now they're gonna plug it in and push it through. Just my words. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary?
Yes, attending the last school committee meeting, the assistant superintendent for finance and inside actually stated that the real number is not 35 million, but 100 million. The 35 million only works if they make the 5 to 6% return on the funding that they propose to reach, whereas the town is getting 2 to 3%. So they have this, the assistant superintendent said the real target number they need to reach is $100 million over the next 30 years. And that includes, after we ramp up to $1.25 million a year for 15 years, then we're gonna take all pension contributions to the Essex for the teachers. That'll have to be added on top of that, so there'll be no savings from the downgrade of the pension plans eventually.
The numbers are certainly astronomical, and it is a widespread issue. And you're not going to buy your way out of it, really. You can't fund your way out of this problem.
That's really the point.
Right.
Wenham has taken a very conservative but responsible approach over many years to attempt to address this issue. I see a very different approach happening here. fiscally irresponsible to try to put that burden on a small segment of the population over a small segment of time. Just does not make sense.
Yeah, certainly it's a tremendous burden to be placed on the town of Wenham for the years to come, not anything short-term, but would persist.
I carry this on only because this is, to me, it's a tax burden killer. I just don't see any sense in it whatsoever, other than, yeah, you have to address it because it's yours for a long time. But to address it, I can't imagine any business person doing something like this in a business. It'll crush their business revenue.
Well, the Finance Committee did vote 4-1 to not support that article,
That's right.
just as an FYI.
Yeah, and recognizing that it's, federally and state mandated, but it was the SRO and OPEB are combined in that one article. And for OPEB, we just wanted it to, there's no reason why it has to be funded over a 30-year period. It's kind of a accounting standard. But just to make the fiscal hit a little less painful, I personally voted no, because I thought, why couldn't it be stretched out over a 40-year, 50-year period, or at least can we get that kind of analysis?
Well, hearing what you just said about the school committee voting against it, was it unanimous?
No.
So the finance committee.
Finance Committee voted not to support the article.
Yeah. Yep,
School Committee voted 5-2 to support it.
yep. And we voted unfavorable action on it. We didn't support it. And we also didn't support, I'm backtracking a bit, the SRO because it was double counted on 2 different budgets. And so for both of those items, we felt like it needed a little more development and
Coordination.
and it just wasn't ripe for action at this point.
Well, I'd like to encourage you folks to please make this a big issue on the floor at town meeting, because I am very sure much of the public is not aware of the financial burden that all of this talk and lawmanship is going to have on our town.
Yeah, and I did vote against that particular budget request, but to your point and what we were discussing earlier, this is a financial structural budget pressure on the school district that they have, it's mandated by law to meet. And so there are a lot of pressures on their budget, as there are in Wenham's budget, back to healthcare, retirement, that take up big pieces of the total pie. That puts us in a tough spot, and then it does have an effect on the town and the school in terms of just what we can deliver for services, quality of life, quality of education. So there are some tough challenges. And another reason why we structured the articles and the Board of Select broke some of these out was try to heighten awareness to the town and to the taxpayers that there are these kind of deep-seated structural issues and challenges. And so we want to highlight them to try and get more people aware of what's going on and engaged and coming to town meeting, coming to the warrant hearing, and making an informed vote and helping resolve some of these problems.
And just to add one quick thing, if I may, Carrie, to clarify, there isn't, I believe, any federal requirement that the OPEB funding take place in either the suggested form manner that the school committee has adopted. I mean, there are accounting GASB accounting
Yeah.
standards.
The state and the federal demand you have to do it, it's just on your books.
Correct.
At some point, if you're going to keep a good financial rating,
Yes.
bonding and so forth, you need to show that you're attempting to do something about it.
Correct.
Take and try to digest the whole elephant in one bite. It's just not sensible. commitment to the debt.
Yeah, that's the one data point that I wanted to give, because we've been talking about the town's OPEB, unfunded OPEB obligation, the schools, and what we're doing versus what they're doing. So, okay, I will talk a little bit more into my microphone. Poor posture. So, that's right. So the town's unfunded OPEB liability right now is $5 million, thereabouts. The schools is $35 million, so about 7x what the town's is. For FY20, the town is funding our unfunded OPEB liability at $50,000. And the schools are proposing to fund their unfunded liability at $250,000. The town adopted a policy a couple of years ago to increase our OPEB liability contribution by $10,000 a year, year over year, and to continue to stick to that schedule until our pension liabilities drop off, in which case we'll be doing something similar to what the schools have proposed. So with a 7x difference in terms of unfunded liability, if the schools were to adopt the same approach that the town has, they would be starting in year one funding their unfunded liability at $70,000. And they're proposing to start it at $250,000. So it's about 4 times a more aggressive approach to funding their unfunded liability that the schools are taking than what the town of Wenham has adopted, which is why we're talking, and of course, their unfunded liability is so much larger. You're talking about almost 20% of our year-over-year new levy capacity over the next 5 years.
Your understanding as to why Wenham took the approach they did is what?
So as Alex mentioned, in the past about two years ago, GASB standards required that municipalities, school districts count this unfunded liability on their books. Bond rating agencies at this point are now looking to see whether you've established a trust, whether you have adopted a funding program, and whether you are adhering to that funding program. They are not, as of yet, looking in any great detail at the percentage to which you are funding your unfunded liability year over year. And
This is a self-imposed discipline as opposed to a mandated discipline.
yeah, there are no federal regulations or standards that require funding OPEB at this time.
The Finance Committee looked at the numbers and said, here's what we think we can responsibly handle. Is that fair?
I don't.
Well, we have indicated to the schools all along what we can handle under our levy limit.
For the town.
Well, to the schools. For the town purposes, yes, absolutely. We feel so that the strategy of, 30, 40, this year, $50,000 per year, they're nominal increases. They're not, placing an undue burden on the town despite all the other challenges. And it's, whether you want to call it a best efforts basis, to Peter's point, it wouldn't do us a whole lot of harm from the standpoint, really, of in any regard, to not do it, right? But it is appropriate to continue to do it. I mean, I'd like to put half my salary in my daughter's 529s, but that's not going to happen. And so there's lofty ambitions, and there's funding your way out of a huge number in 30 years, but you're never really going to fund your way out of it. The one comment I want to make, Gary, to your point about the larger numbers, the $35 million is in the Odyssey annual audit for the schools. And I think a lot of it has to do with they haven't established anything yet, so there's really no kind of valid capital market assumptions as it would relate to their asset mix and the like. Were there savings where you could look back at actuals and say, it's grown X percent over, whatever time period, because there's nothing yet. So I think you kind of start low, and as time goes on. But just to your point about the, whether it's 100 million or whatever it is, I think the valuation date of July 31st, 2017 has it at 35 million.
Thank you for entertaining the conversation. To me, this is one of the most important things that our town is facing financially.
I agree.
Take this burden on, it is going to hurt people in ways that they don't even realize.
I just want to make a general comment on the school budget. I think it's important to note that the override this year is a level service budget for the school. I'm not speaking on behalf of the school committee, but that doesn't include any new programs, that $499,000. And it appears from our best projections that that's going to continue to roll forward just for level services. So that's a big number right now.
That's
That-
what we have to keep our eye on, is we want to continue giving providing for our children, next generation's children, a good quality education. To take on this whole burden at this rate, means there's gonna have to be give somewhere. It's either gonna be in the town side or the education side or both.
Correct, or continued overrides. Right.
Drive us all somewhere else.
Is there a question in the back as well? Or,
Yes, I just wondered about these unfunded responsibilities. Does that change, for example, if the staffing at the school were to be diminished instead of staying at the same level, would the unfunded amounts needed then diminish in that way as well?
you want to,
Yeah, so Virginia, the town, the school, we're required now, with the new GASB regulations in place, to have a biannual actuarial analysis of our unfunded OPEB liability. So every 2 years, that will be recalculated, and we'll look at all of the underlying assumptions in terms of staffing, in terms of the health insurance plans and benefits that are available to staff at that moment in time and going forward. So all of that is taken into account. And the rate of return is also recalculated. That was one of the reasons why the town's unfunded liability increased by almost $1 million this last iteration, was largely because we moved to a more conservative rate of return with the analysis that was done. So all of those things are looked at every other year.
thank you, Peter. Okay. The last slide, perhaps, second to last on the tax rate impact of the articles, is a table that is perhaps better viewed on the handout than on the screen. I apologize, the numbers are slightly smaller, but effectively it compiles that which we've just reviewed for Articles 1, 3, and 4. The increase of the levy limit for the two overrides, and the corresponding estimated tax rate impact of each of the articles. There's some shading that kind of groups the articles together, so you can see the total net impact there in the bottom of Article 4, which includes the OPEB funding, on top of Article 3 for the level services, and on top of course, the levy limit budget, Article 1. But the numbers are unchanged, so there's no net new numbers here. I'm happy to answer questions about this. I feel we've had a lot of good discussion on this kind of tax rate impact view, and some good suggestions as to how to even present it a little bit more clearly so that residents can understand how their money's being spent and how much of it is going to impact their tax rate. Yes, Jackie?
I'm sorry, just so, it's actually harder to read it in the packet.
Oh.
For those that want to see it, the old version of the chart is on page 3 of the warrant book. The handout actually is more challenging than the slide. So it's page 3, but that's the old number before the school district.
Okay.
It's a little bit easier to read and bigger font.
Okay. Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, much higher quality printing. Yep, page 4 of your part 2 warrant book.
It's just the slightly older data.
Right, right. So I'll just offer the corrections real quickly in case those of you want to jot it down who might have a pen handy. So Articles 1 and 2 are unchanged. Article 3 is unchanged. And as we've talked about, Article 4 no longer needs to include the school resource officer funding. So what was an increase of $615,264? Cross that out. And it's $589,020, $589,020. for the overrides. 020, exactly, instead of 615, 264. And then moving to the right on that bottom row, which we're correcting while we're at it, instead of 14 cents per thousand, it's 11 cents for the tax rate impact. The tax rate column, instead of $19.16, it's $19.13. It's up 6.2% instead of 6.3, and it's up $63 instead of 81 for that particular article. So again, I apologize to have to offer any revisions to these numbers, but we want to make sure you have the most recent. Catherine?
Alex, since you were talking, I was calculating, so to the question over here, if I do my math right, if all of these articles pass, including the overrides, the median house tax bill would be approximately $11,000.
On the base of?
On the basis of a $19.13 tax.
Understood, Catherine, thank you. I guess I meant the original, the FY '20 median, to begin with, 10. Right. And the corresponding tax rate was, I'm asking you these questions, you should be up here.
No, I just did I'm using this same chart, and I just used the tax rate and multiplied each of the tax rates by the 574.
That's right.
The tax bill would be.
Which is the figure that Jack was referencing on page 52. We have the
Yes.
estimated 20 tax bill of $11,000.
Right. So that's been all of them.
Yes.
10,600 is only article 1 and 2 tax. So to get a sense of what the tax bill is going to be.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so structure, very similar to last year. The numbers are a bit more daunting, in fact, given the nature of the override. Last year was 331,000, now we're at 589. So it's a significant increase in the proposed levy limit increase, should these pass. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So we've got one last recap on the articles. The net amount to be raised, prior year levy limit. So we're raising $16,849,176. The levy limit before debt was $15,134,590. We add the Prop 2.5 increase to that levy limit. We add new growth from our measure and list project and from new development. And we then add, of course, the school override for purposes of this analysis. We then have an increased levy limit, add our excluded debt, the maximum levy limit. I meant to ask you earlier, the $504, the plug there, the gap.
Oh, the difference with that is when we built this schedule, we used the history numbers from the recap, which were slightly higher.
Yes.
On the revenue side, so it flushed out. So when we built this schedule,
Yeah.
we went back and we pulled everything from the recap, which is our actual
From
experience.
actuals, the state
Right, and
recap.
so there was a little bit of a difference, and we had a little bit of excess.
Had it been
levy.
versus FY19 budgeted numbers,
It
we
would've
wouldn't
been
have had that $500 gap.
Exactly, it would have been flat.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's a question that I've meant on a few occasions earlier today to ask you, and I appreciate the response. So that $500 is just a matter of budget versus actuals playing out. Okay. Any other questions on this information before we move ahead? And we get into the articles themselves. Do we want to read? Probably don't need to read these, right? Yeah, okay. We'll be reading these at town meeting, and I should have indicated earlier that I hope it's okay with all of you that we're not going through a line item by line item of the budget this evening. Jack, you can stay late. We'll be out of here by 10:30. We'll go through it. Jack and I'll have a special line item recap. So that whole shouting of the hold for anyone who wishes to raise a question related to a specific expenditure on the budget does so at town meeting. And so for now, we see the budget appropriation for Article 1, which we've talked a whole lot about. Article 2, we've talked a little bit about on the next slide, and that's the free cash transfer used to balance the budget. We don't have a whole lot left in reserves this year. It's not looking great. There's not a whole lot of excess cash laying around. And we'll use most of the free cash, 72%, for FY '20. And as we've talked about, the certification, the free cash has come down. So if we look at the certification 2 years ago for FY '17, 2 years ago from the current year, 2.2 million. And FY '18 from last year's town meeting, because free cash is certified after the fact, is 950,000. So significant decrease in free cash.
Yeah.
Questioning it? No?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't have 2, we had 1.2.
Yeah,
We had 1.2, yeah. Whew.
Say.
Yeah, 1.2 mil, that would be not good.
rounding error.
Rounding error. This is our dry run
This
before
is the dry
Saturday,
run,
this is
yeah,
why you're
exactly.
here.
The slide deck might look a
Some
little
of this-
different.
Yeah, it will have some tweaks. Okay, and on the next slide is just the motion to move free cash, so we can move right past that.
That was right. Oh, 'cause you used capital and 750.
We can also breeze past the next slide on Article 3, as that's just the, these are the motions for the articles, which I feel we've covered in some detail. Certainly nothing new in the motion language. Brings us to Article 5. So cemetery and other trust funds, this is a standard acceptance article. It's procedural. And basically, we're enabling the expenditure of accrued funds from donations for general or restricted purposes as provided by gift or trust. And it's one that I'm sure you look forward to hearing every year at town meeting. It doesn't change. So we'll just move rather quickly through these and simply ask any questions that you may have. Skipping the motion itself, Article 6 is a cemetery maintenance fund transfer. This is for the DPW's maintenance. It's done of our cemeteries, which costs about $30,000 a year. And basically, as lots are sold and proceeds from burial costs, those monies go into the general fund to help offset this, $15,000 to $20,000. And so we're looking to transfer another $7,500 to help cover the cost of DPW's maintenance of the cemeteries. Next slide simply has the motion itself. Article 7 is our Chapter 90 funding, which lets us expend in anticipation of getting the monies from the state for our road capital for a Chapter 90 program. And I think we're looking at $150,000 anticipated based on previous year's state help with taking care of our roads. The motion itself is on the following slide. Yes, John?
Compared to the prior years, is it more, is it less?
The same.
It's the same amount it's been historically. It's based, of course, on road miles. There's a formula, and the appropriation expected from the state is going to be, again, $200 million. So our annual appropriation will be $150,000, plus or minus $1,000 or so.
Okay, Article 8, transfer from water operating budget to water capital reserve fund. So this is to help in anticipation of replacing at some point our portions of our water mains, which are aging but in good shape, and obviously very important infrastructure to the town. Well maintained, but we've got to set aside money for a significant capital expense at some point. And beginning with last year, the Water Commission moves $35,000 to an account annually to plan for this, to set aside monies and without impacting the water rate as well that residents pay. The motion itself is on the following slide. And moving to Article 9, which is the halfway point. Do we have 18? Is that right?
Yep.
18 to last year's 36. Article 9 is the transfer from the Water Department undesignated fund balance surplus to the Water Department, FY19 Water Department operating expense. Town provides materials for installation of new water services for subdivisions and developments, and then we're reimbursed for each new installation. So we provide the upfront and get reimbursed. A transfer is required to offset the one-time expenditure related to new services, new water services that occurred this year at Wenham Pines and Spring Hill. So the subdivisions going in and getting water hookups, we're fronting it and then get reimbursed. So the Water Department has already recovered these costs via FY 2019, so that it'll be added back to the undesignated fund balance surplus at the end of FY 19. The article follows. Which brings us to Article 10, which is to amend the Veterans Property Tax Work-Off Program. This seeks to increase the maximum abatement amount in a given tax year to residents participating in this program to the new state limit of $1,500, and that matches the senior property tax work-off program. So we want to encourage more participation in this program to give tax relief to veterans and to those who need it the most. Following the article, following the motion, we move to Article 11. Bylaw amendment for the Iron Rail revolving funds, seeking a $5,000 annual spending limit increase of the Iron Rail rental revolving fund from $25,000 to $30,000 to pay for smaller capital projects, in this case, the septic system, which I believe the DPW is going to be doing for them, right? Yeah, which is great that Bill Tyak's team can do that at a very reasonable cost. $25,000 balance is committed to covering debt obligations for the next 10 years for paving and roof repairs, the larger capital at Iron Rail, approved last year at town meeting. Questions on Iron Rail? If none, we'll...
Nice new sign.
Yeah, and the sign's nice, yeah. You drive by it every day. We move past the article. The motion and on to Article 12 for CPA appropriations. Okay, there are several motions here. So in the first slide, we see the town adopted, of course, the Community Preservation Act in 2005, approving the 3% surcharge on our real estate taxes, plus a variable state match, which can be used to fund qualifying projects. The Community Preservation Act mandates 10% of projected annual revenues be allocated to open space, community housing, and historic preservations. And the committee conducts initial screening of grant applications, reviewing eligible needs in the town. And so what follows on the following slide, set of slides, are those recommended grants from the CPC. Motion 1, and Harriet is here as well, so if you find appropriate to chime in, please do so. Great. Motion 1, the Community Preservation Committee moves, I wasn't looking to read that, sorry.
This is because of last year, we under-allocated.
Okay.
We underestimated our annual revenues. So the very first thing we need to do is correct what we did last year at town meeting by adding this $21,000, roughly $7,000 each of the three categories.
Split three ways, as is always the formula. Okay. So $21,867.30 gets split, $7,289 each to Historic Resources Reserve, Open Space and Recreation Reserve, and the Community Housing Reserve as well. So that seems like a straightforward one.
Right. Then the next one, motion 2, is to make the allocations for the current year.
Right. So prior fiscal year and now.
A higher amount of money. In addition, we've added in $7,500 for administrative costs. That covers the coalition dues, our minute taker, and our staff person, and any other expenses that we might have for posting hearings, advertising them in the newspapers, and so forth. The budgetary reserve is I just call it a reserve fund.
Great, the 10% split through, the 10% is 119,490, right? Split three ways to the three kind of special purposes, with the remainder to the reserves and administrative, as you pointed out, correct? Great. Passed the motion for 3.
This one is for the town hall debt, it's what we've been doing every year. You might note that it's only $126,000. On other years, it's been close to $200,000. It's a declining amount. The bond, I think, will be paid off in maybe 6 or 7 years, which will be wonderful. And we have, the state has paid a lion's share of this over, because the match in the earlier years was 100% of CPC. So this is our standard motion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, number 4. Okay, now we're getting into the motions that are different from year to year. These are based on the applications that we receive. And this first one is from Habitat for Humanity for affordable housing. I might note that this is for the creation of 2 units. And the Affordable Housing Trust has already granted $230,000 to this project for a total of $290,000 for the creation of 2 units. I will say that all this did pass. Of course, it wouldn't be here, but it was less than a unanimous vote.
I have a question on that one. Supposing the town meeting decides against this one, because it decides maybe it would return that $60,000 to the affordable trust unit if they may find where they might get more for the money. Would, and I don't know if you can answer this, would Habitat still take the $230,000 and build the 2 units, or would they abandon the project altogether?
It's a great question. I don't know that I can answer it in terms of the terms that go along with the grant for the original funding, and whether or not there are stipulations that they continue it, or whether, to your point, they could abandon it. I don't know. Jackie?
I think town meeting ought to
Yeah.
know the answer to that.
It's a great, yeah, Harriet, I don't know if you know offhand, or?
Oh, well, so I can answer part 1 of that, which is that the Affordable Housing Trust has a separate process and a separate allocation. So that allocation has already gone through, it already exists.
I know, but that's immaterial.
But part 2, we would hopefully get from Habitat, which we can
Yeah.
do.
Jackie, that's not the question I asked.
That's not the question.
If the town meeting turns down this $60,000 because it thinks maybe it would return it to affordable housing trust unit, because maybe the town thinks it could get more for the money someplace else. Now, would Habitat still take the $230,000 and build the 2 units, or would they abandon the project altogether, or would they take the $230,000 and run? Does anybody know? The town meeting ought to know the answer to that.
Peter may know, but
Actually, this is under the.
Very well might.
he knows everything.
It's the latter part. He just wants to know, will Habitat Humanity walk away? That sort of question.
They would.
The $230,000 from the Affordable Housing Trust is intended to be used, and correct me if I'm missing something, for the acquisition of the property. This $60,000, according to the pro forma, is to be used to help them towards the construction of the affordable housing. If this is not passed, it will not be returned to the Affordable Housing Trust
Sorry, I left. Good timing. Sure.
Peter, I asked next Saturday, should the town vote down this request, this $60,000 for Habitat? Because the town might think that it's too much money, or they might think that affordable housing can use it for something that would give us more for the money. If that were the case and they voted down, now, would Habitat abandon the project, or would they take the $250,000 and continue with the project, or just what would happen?
I can't answer that question.
Then I said, we ought to be able to inform the town meeting what the answer to that is before we ask them to vote another $60,000, vote $60,000.
I liked Rick's answer.
What I'm suggesting is that the Community Preservation Act should have that knowledge, it should have asked those questions and be prepared to say yes or no, they like that idea or not, because that person. We're past that stage now with the town, so I don't think it's us.
Let me answer that one, please, okay? I was at that community preservation meeting, and this passed, I think it was 5-2, it was against it, okay? But the pressure in the room that day, there were 3 selectmen there, there were other committee members there, there were, the pressure was amazing. And I don't know how the two that voted against it got that.
Well, I think that what I can speak to is, I did not get the sense from the representative from Habitat that if he didn't get the money, the project would fail. I don't recall anything along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, all I have is the same information that the CPC has, which is the application from Habitat for Humanity North Shore, which included a financial pro forma for the project. To Catherine's point, $230,000 was to be used for acquisition. They have budgeted a $60,000 contribution from the town of Wenham to move forward with the construction of the project. Whether they could secure other funding sources and still move forward with the project, those details were not given, to my knowledge, to the Board of Selectmen.
I think town meeting ought to have the facts on the table before they vote on it.
Certainly, if the question were to be raised, I think we'd want to have the definitive answer. I'm not in a position to provide it, and I don't know that it's clear that we know who is, but maybe we can take that as an aside to, you know.
I'm sure we'll have the answer to the question by town meeting.
Peter, is that something you're going to follow up on?
No, I would just like to comment, I think it's important to know that much of the funding, or some of the funding at any rate, that now exists for the housing authority, came from CPA funding originally, so that the 10% per year was put aside. And it was put there, I think, probably in good faith, but without the proper controls, that I don't think that if anything had been brought before CPA, that we could have been brought before the taxpayers, that we would contribute $290,000 and get 2 affordable units from that. You simply, we can't afford that kind of expenditure, especially when you look at the other kinds of affordable housing options are also on the ballot. If we want to build 220 units, the taxpayers shouldn't be expected to pay $150,000 per unit.
So I think for each of the 3 projects that requested funding from the CPC this year, they all are seeking partial funding for the project. They're looking for other sources. So if we're asking Habitat whether the project will not move forward if they don't get CPC funding at the $60,000 that's been requested, I think we should ask the other 2 projects the same question. Community House and for the Harbor Light.
And to supplement with
Was there a question in there, Leo?
Appropriations, 45 units times 145,000, just about 6.5 million.
If people would like to find out more about that plan, I will be at town meeting in the hallway beforehand with the report that was generated by an outside consultant to show a pathway for those 20 units, but not at that per unit cost. So if you'd like to come by and take a look at that, I'd gladly help educate people and how that's going to happen and how it's not really 150,000 for 20 units each. So if you'd like, I can help you understand that better. I'll let you know. Or you can go to the website. It's all posted on the Housing Trust webpage. You
Good.
can go there and download the report.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And, I want to keep us on track with it. Obviously, these are complex, and we haven't even gotten to perhaps the most, delicate of the motions under CPA. So I want to recognize that, when it goes past our ability to answer the question, then I think what we need to do is arrive at the next step to make sure that the residents at town meeting have access to those definitive, answers and resources. So thank you for raising the questions, but I just want to recognize that we may not be able to solve them all this evening.
Okay, now this, by the way, on many of these appropriations, there are contingencies that some are pretty obvious and some are lengthy, and as we go on, we may ask other people to comment on them, but I'll come to that in a minute. The next one, can you go through the next,
I'm working on it.
motion five. All right, now, this is for the community house. They requested just under 100,000. We felt it was premature. What they are going to do is to enter into a $2 to $3 million capital campaign in the near future. But in the meantime, they have a list of repairs to the current structure that they felt were pressing. And we looked at them, and part of CPA says we cannot fund maintenance. And many of the articles of the requests that they made, we felt were really beyond what our CPA could approve. And on the advice of council, we were told it would be up to us to make that determination. Consequently, we decided to fund $50,000 for their heating system, because that apparently is on, should we say, last legs. And so that is why this is a partial amount, and that is what the committee is recommending to town meeting.
Should that last word here be by instead of on?
I would also note, just for interest, Hamilton did vote the entire amount.
I just have a quick question. I don't know if anyone, on this appropriation, could you go back one, Peter?
Sure.
Again, just for grammatical or for my understanding. Nope, that was it. This vote, the last line, shall not have meant commenced on July 1. Should that be by?
Hamilton, you mean about the date?
Yeah, should the word say by? And no, instead of the word on, should it say by?
Probably.
July, by July, has not commenced
Prob-
by July.
Okay.
Probably by.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's so minor.
Put that into their
Okay.
motion, so we decided to add it to ours. There's a feeling, as you're going to see in a minute, we don't want to approve funds and just let them hang out there forever and ever.
Right.
Okay, so the next one, okay, now we're coming into two rather sort of a breather. Yes, this is just about it. This one, motion 6, is for $6,000 to be transferred from the open space and recreation reserve for a trail map project. Now, earlier on Saturday, I will point out that there's, when all is said and done, there'll still be $677,000 in the open space and recreation reserve, and it's the only reserve that will have any funds left.
you edit some yourself and read
Yeah,
others.
well, I think if nobody will understand the difference.
Yeah, I'm good,
I would suggest exactly that.
Sure.
Make it very clear to everybody, that this is not just a gift of $750,000 that's going out there. Harbor Light has a list of, requirements that they have to fulfill.
Just a comment on that
No,
one,
thanks, man.
please, a comment on that one.
Yes.
750,000 divided by 45 units is a lot less than 145,000 units. In fact, it's down around 16,000.
28,000.
And it sounds like more for the money. But those are both go to the town meeting, and they make the decision.
I
But
would
they
also
should be well informed.
point out that these 45 units will get us substantially over the 10% hurdle. That will then allow the planning board to exert a great deal of pressure on any proposed unfriendly 40B applications. Is that not correct?
That's correct. And Harry, this was unanimously approved by the CPC, is that correct?
No.
Oh, it isn't correct.
No, well, because
I watched the meeting, and I'm quite surprised at your answer.
one person essentially abstained.
Okay.
Okay, but there was no objection. They were all in favor of Harbor Light, all in favor of,
Just trying to get the flavor.
yes. The flavor was yes.
A comment. The biggest thing that getting over 10% is do, to drive down the price of open space, which developers salivate over at the present. If we get over 10%, eliminate 40B, less units are possible on open space, so it drives down the price, and the town and CPA with their open space funds can acquire some open space, something we haven't been able to do since we've had CPA.
Catherine?
So just for clarification, because I think there's a piece of this that's being missed in this conversation and has absolutely nothing to do with the project or the cost or any of those things. I think the town meeting, this group and the town meeting should understand that this project is and has been under litigation for the last 4 or 5 years. So statements such as, this is the new project and this is final and this is what we're going to get, may be true, and hopefully we'll know that soon. But we're in a stage, sort of in-between stage of a mediation process, which is a form of a settlement, but not a complete settlement. So we don't actually know for sure, and maybe we'll know by Saturday, don't know, but we don't know for sure right now what this project is going to look like, because the terms are in sort of outline form and have not been approved by the parties. So, in full disclosure, nothing to do with the project itself, really to do with where the project is right now.
Andrew, can you comment on that, please?
I have a question when you're.
Where do you stand with the plans?
Yep, that'd be fine,
There's a
thank you.
mic, I think, over there.
Yep, yep. Provided it works. Yeah, give it maybe a quick check. I assume it's hooked up, but I don't know.
Could just hit it with a hammer or something.
Seems to work.
It's okay? Yes. I'm Andrew DeFranza, for anybody who doesn't know me. It's nice to see everybody. It's been a little while, and we've been working with the Housing Trust on a variety of things, mostly this project, a couple other things for about 8 years. So I was much younger and thinner and had more hair at the time, but it's nice to be back. So the question, I think, specifically is about the settlement. As Selectman Harrison mentioned, it's been under litigation for about 3.5 years after it was approved unanimously by the zoning board. There was a settlement agreement that came via mediation a couple of months ago, and we are, it appears, very, very close to the final settlement agreement. My hope is that we will have that in hand before you go to town meeting, hopefully a couple days before. I saw a couple of the passes back and forth today, and the issues that are remaining are very narrow and appear to be something that can be addressed and agreed upon. That's my hope and expectation, that we would know that before town meeting. Does that answer the question? Okay.
I had I'm sorry, someone in the back. Oh, that yours job to recognize her, I'm sorry.
Planning board, when all this started, and I think that I would just like to hear from Harriet and Andrew if all of these limitations that have been put on this particular approval are in concert with a best faith effort by the CPA. I don't think that any of these restrictions were presented as part of the application, and I wonder if we aren't setting the project up for failure because we know what time it takes to get state money, which is necessary for any project. And I'm concerned that we let this stand, all of these limitations.
Yeah, please, Jack, feel free.
I think the Board of Selectmen, speaking of the Board of Selectmen, we were concerned that, principally that, once we approve this, we didn't want the money to just sit there for years and not be accessed for affordable housing. So we put some, rather, tight time frame. So my understanding is that, once the ZBA approves, once the ZBA approves the revised this edition, like it's 2 stories and so forth, that they have 1 year, to get a building permit, and that after, presumably they'll take it out next to the last day. And then they have 18 months after that to get a certificate of occupancy. That's a tight time frame. Sure, let me finish. I'm answering your question. Just hold on. Okay. So we thought that was pretty tight, and Mr. DeFranza that was pretty tight. So we put it in the Board of Selectmen at the time can modify that to make it a longer period of time, basically 2.5 years to 3.5 years to 4.5 years, as long as movement is going forward on this development. We don't want the development to stop. We don't want it to just go nowhere either, so we don't want to tie up $2 million forever by not having a good faith effort to go forward in those parts of it. And so as long as Aqualite is going forward, if it's approved, and he eventually, next 2 or 3 days, hopefully, gets the plaintiffs and him, Aqualite together on the same page in terms of legal agreement, we want to encourage them to go forward, but nevertheless have some restrictions about making sure that the town's being served well, because although people think that once we approve this, if it's approved, and they get the money from the Affordable Housing Trust, that we're all set for the 40B, we're over 10%. The answer is no, we're not. Let me explain that. And so once, we only have, again, 1 year and then a year and a half after that, unless this is an active project, any development and do an adverse 40B offenses. So we want to make sure that we have the ability to ensure that Aqualite is fulfilling their plans to go forward and actually build this out, or not. And we need to be able to take the money back if they're not going forward. So I'm sure they're going to go forward, but we still have to have it. So we have the ability here, the Board of Selectmen in the future, to extend that 3 years to 4 years or some period longer than that, as long as the then Board of Selectmen, whoever it is satisfied that Aqualite is moving forward in an expeditious manner. And that's fundamentally what we do. There are other restrictions, but that's the principal one that I thought was
So you said several times that the money will be coming from the Affordable Housing Trust. In fact, it will not, right? So this money will not be given to the Affordable Housing Trust to disperse. It will still come from CPA.
There is no appropriation. There are 2 funding sources.
What's your question? What's your question?
You're asking the CPA for the money and not the Affordable Housing Trust.
He thinks you may have mentioned the Affordable Housing Trust when you mentioned.
Well, Aqualite said they need $1 million, $750,000 come from CPC, and they're going to be, I understand, applying for another $250,000 from the Affordable Housing Trust. That's a separate group. They can decide yes or no. And if it doesn't go forward, this may be in deep trouble.
for,
Counting on another $250,000
But it wasn't obvious here.
making it obvious now, frankly. So this is not going to guarantee we'll go forward with this project. He needs a $250,000 before possible, which I understand he has not made an application yet. Is that correct? Am I answering your question?
Yes.
Plus we have the documents that were mailed to us. We can go there too.
Take that as timeline of these concerns that we have and the dates that are in the, I think, past, I think the selectmen added 3 or 4 contingencies to the 3 or 4 that were added by the CPC. We seem to think that we made them arbitrarily, but I wanted to be clear that all of the dates that we used, well, that's what it felt like. But just so that everyone knows, all of the dates that we used, that we pegged things to as contingencies, came right out of the CPC application made by Envelope to your organization. That's here. So the 3 years, all of that are dates that are proposed by Envelope. So if they're not realistic, I don't know what to say about that.
So
Back to you, Alex.
I just want to keep the adjournment on the same date as the, call to order. So, but I think that, I think that this has clearly been key discussion and not just random resident discussion. I think everyone here has a lot of knowledge about this project. Andrew, thanks for being here, and have vested interest in it and seek to get answers to their questions from each other prior to town meeting. I see no end to the questions at town meeting. They're going to continue. And clearly, the people before us in the FinCom have perhaps more of the answers than do we, which is why I gave you some free rein. As it relates to FinCom's view of this project from a fiscal lens perspective, as with other projects that involve expenditures by the town and taxpayer dollars, our view has not yet been established insofar as a vote having been taken. We have deferred any recommendation to town meeting thus far and are doing so until town meeting, and are attempting to learn as we are from your discussions a few moments ago, as well as through the myriad documentation that has been with us for some time and some that's late breaking, and with acknowledgement also that there's a lot that isn't exactly available to the public, inclusive of FinCom, as to our decision making. So we'll vote as residents. We are not required to make a recommendation to town meeting as to this particular project, but may well do so pending our meeting ahead of town meeting to deliberate and come to the course of action for recommendation. So that's all I have to say about that. I know that this is valuable discussion, but again, I just want to keep us on track to these. So if we can move forward, I want to make sure, though, that while Andrew and others are here, that if anyone else on FinCom taking this opportunity has any questions specific to Maple Woods, that they have the opportunity to.
I don't have a question. It's just an observation. This is a very complicated article, and I would guess that probably at least half of the members of town meeting will not have information about this. In any way, Harriet or Andrew, that you can outline this on some kind of a decision tree, on some kind of a board as you go through. I don't know if that's possible or not, but some way to make sure that the town meeting has this information laid out as clearly as possible. I don't want to assume that, because you know it very well, Harriet, and Andrew does, but a good portion of the town meeting won't. So any way that we can facilitate that would be great.
I'll also be there too, to explain to town members what the town went through this year-long cycle of searching, integrating different town members, board members, FinCom, and over 40 members of the community came to talk about what their wants and desires were in a project of this type, and what affordable housing meant to them in Wenham, and how it should work. So if people would like to hear that view, what the people said, and how they view this project or other projects in town, I'd be glad to disseminate the information. Or you can visit the Wenham Affordable Housing Trust webpage. Download the results of that project.
Fair enough.
If I may, just one question for my own benefit on FinCom. Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, just briefly, a moment or two on the project as it relates to taxation to the town, whether it would potentially be in the form of a pilot, or if the pro forma suggests that the residents would be taxed, and anything you can help us understand along those lines, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
So questions about taxation of the project?
It
correct?
is, thanks.
Harborlight has a policy of paying taxes on real estate taxes on all of our buildings. There's actually a posting on our website, harborlightcp.org, if people would like to see what those tax levels were for about the last 12 years in all the different North Shore towns we're in. So in this case, we would expect it would be no different. We don't have any pilot situations and tend not to prefer those for various political implications and the statement we want to pay taxes. However, generally what will happen from an assessor standpoint is the NOI the net operating income will get calculated and your assessment rate will get applied. And because it's an affordable project with restricted revenue, of course, that net operating income is not very good. And so it's much less taxes than would be paid if this was a market rate luxury building of 45 units, but it is still taxes that are consistent with evaluation based on the operating income of the asset. And so it gets calculated like anything else would, but we're careful to make sure that the restricted revenue and associated costs are understood at the assessor's level so that they can tax it appropriately to what it is, what its valuation is.
Thank you. And is there a cap rate associated with this particular?
Not specific
per
to
se.
this. That's different than anything else.
Yep.
You know, whatever happens to be market at the time would be the applicable cap rate. It's really the NOI number that drives how it's going to turn out. But no, we don't try to pre-negotiate a pilot.
And is that through an arrangement with the assessor's office generally that
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, we certainly, that would be our approach, is we would go in and say, here's the operating expenses, here's the income, here's the fixed levels of rent based on the required commitments of the various funding sources. So when we put a project together, money comes in, just like this one, where it says that the applicable participants have to be below 80% of median income, and then the rents are adjusted accordingly. So that is a hard ceiling on your income numbers. You know what your expenses are going to be. And so we would go in advance, especially, and talk to the assessor and say, here's the revenue, here's the expenses, here's the market cap rate. We're expecting that the taxes will be X, something to that effect. We don't want that to be arbitrary or accidental later.
How often are there projects where you don't pay taxes?
We have no projects where we don't pay taxes.
Thank you.
Zero.
Oh.
Yeah, we pay taxes everywhere.
Andrew, just to follow up,
Yes.
Order of magnitude for a 45-unit project, if that comes in based on other projects you have on the North Shore, what would your ballpark be for tax
that's a good
revenue?
question, Peter. And I have, unfortunately, I think I had baked into my mind, seared perhaps, the 60-unit operating model after all that time. So the 45-unit model I'm less comfortable with, but it's probably in the low 30s, something to that effect. 30s, low 30s, yeah. Yes, sir. Low 30s.
I thought it was 25,000.
Right. If you're 11,000.
The tax revenue we'll get from this project
Mhm.
will be approximately that of $574,000.
Right.
Oh, very good.
Right. Yep. No, it's total. And it's also good to note in that scenario, there is, from a cost standpoint, the project carries its own costs for plowing its own snow, taking care of its own trash, taking care of its own maintenance, so there's not those associated costs. Right. There would be, of course, if there was police or fire. Because it's an elderly building, there's not associated school costs. So it's not no costs, but the operating costs associated with the project are borne by the project. Yes, ma'am.
Basically, you're asking the town for what, around 3.5% of the project cost?
That's probably about right. Yeah, it's really a
That needs to be.
Yeah.
It's really a sweetener.
Yes.
Let the state know that we're invested in this, that we're interested in it.
Yes.
And to give us some kind of local preference at some level, right?
Yeah, it's really leverage locally. That's really what, in terms of its power, which is very significant. That's what it's intended to do, CPA in a lot of communities. And it accomplishes really three major things. One is it facilitates, way back when we started this, the idea of doing an elderly project, which the state is not generally favorable to. So that certainly helps significantly when we're asking the state for many, many millions of dollars. to show robust commitment from the town. It will help negotiate the local preference feature, and this project also has a lot of bells and whistles associated with it in terms of screening and water conservation and a variety of other elements, and it certainly helps with any augmentation that the community wants related to the project, and that's not uncommon in any community we work in. Any others,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah. Thank you.
Do we
Nice
have
to see everybody.
someone tasked with trying to get the answer to the question if these 3 big projects aren't funded through these appropriations, will they go on and be funded otherwise or not? To the gentleman's question earlier, and it's come up.
My suggestion was that all 3 entities be asked the same question. Certainly
At
can be
town
asked.
meeting?
Certainly can be asked.
To be made aware of that.
So,
No, not intended.
so I was just trying to figure out if the gentleman that asked the question earlier, if we're going to try and find out in advance and have it ready for town meeting, what will happen to these projects if they don't get the town appropriation. But it sounds like there'll be representatives at town meeting who can provide those answers then and there.
I can certainly ask the question of all 3 entities, whether they
Who will-
respond
who will
and
be
and
there,
to
and
they
and
have
to
a
what
vested
extent they
interest to be there?
respond, I can't say.
So I think that's the spirit of a lot of the questions that have been raised.
Yep.
Yep. At least with one project and carried to another, so. Great. Okay. Thank you. So we'll move to past motion 8. Several slides. To motion 9. Thank you, Harriet.
Once upon a time, we had a historic district commission, which had a very clear bylaw. And then a few years ago, we adopted a historical commission, and somehow or other, the bylaw got joined and became very confusing, to the extent that one could not even go to the bylaw to find out what the requirements were for one who happened to inhabit the historic district. So all that we are now asking is that this bylaw be separated into 2, as it says there, to provide clarity to residents living in the district. There's no funding, no additional authority or jurisdiction or anything else. It's really only, it's almost like a bookkeeping entry. It's just a clarification, and I can't imagine there'll be any discussion.
Okay, terrific. Yep, procedural, that's great. Okay, Article 14 is the acceptance of Settlers Lane as a public way. This was never intended to be a private way, correct? This is just a development, now online, need to comply with town regulatory standards, paving, grading, stormwater management, width. Initially approved by the planning board, now fully complete, town has to verify that it meets the requirements for acceptance. Great, thank you. And anything else you want to add to that, or? No? Okay. I can read it. Would you care to? Sure. Thanks. Makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Great. Actually, do you mind using the microphone just so if others are? Thank you.
Sure, I can't actually see what's there, but this is the amendment on signs. I'm going to propose some wording changes to this slide, if this is the slide that's going to be up at the meeting. Just because what this article, what this zoning bylaw amendment actually does is to define the purpose and applicability of the sign ordinance, and clarify the placement and timing of temporary non-municipal signs. So it's a little, the first bullet is not completely accurate. There is a portion of the amendment that talks about giving the Board of Selectmen the capacity to establish policy on on signs on municipal property, but that's not the primary purpose of the zoning ordinance amendment. So I don't know who I should offer that language clarification to. Maybe I'll give it to you after the meeting or however you want to handle it, but I just feel like there could be more clarity in this sign,
Thank you.
and in this slide, the sign ordinance slide. So if no one has any questions about it, I'll sit back down.
Article 17, another bylaw amendment, penalties. Several sections of the town's general bylaws prohibit certain acts but do not identify any consequences or fines for violators of that bylaw. This amendment provides penalties for violations of the town's general bylaws that do not currently have specific fees or enforcement provisions attached to them. Say again? That's all there is for that one. That's it. Thought we had 18, but we had 17.
Well, 18 is for the election itself.
Oh, of course, that's right. Thank you, we do. Okay, any other questions on any of this? Spirited discussion. Thanks for being part of this process. Much appreciate it, being here this evening. Thank you.
Thanks.
By all means. Yes, important. See you Saturday. Great.
Thank you, Alex.
You can do so.
I make a motion that the FinCom committee adjourn.
Second.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, David. All in favor?
All.
Great.